Hey guys, what's up? It's Dean. Welcome to the Manful Yoga Podcast. Today, my guest is Matt Allison, a fellow Austinite, an entrepreneur, and a lot of other really cool things that we'll get into here. So, Matt, thanks again for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we'll get a little bit more into you in a second, but I always like to tell people how we met. So we have a mutual friend, Gary, who's actually showed up in a beginner yoga series that I did on YouTube that lives entirely for free on YouTube. We filmed it out at Bull Creek, which is this beautiful creek here in Austin, part of the Greenbelt. Um, and he brought you along to a workout one morning. This was like 2014. I used to live very close to these fields where we would go do, like conditioning and sprinting and sports conditioning stuff. And he said, "Hey, is it cool if I bring my buddy along?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And you show up, and I'm like, "Who's this goober?" Uh, and and I think I don't even know if we exchanged any words that day. But this this not goober, Matt, eventually went on to do some really cool things. Paramount of which, well, I think the one of the most interesting of which is selling a business that you created for hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, and the reason I wanted to bring you on the show is because we were talking about this earlier before we started, but I think that people who have the ability to create the vision and create what it takes to be that successful, especially you're not even how you're not near 40 yet. I don't
35.
think 35. I just think that people who are able to do that, they are also adept or have put in a lot of thought into just how to take care of themselves and health and mental wellness, and having big part of which I think is just having the headspace to be able to create clarity and a vision like that. So, and you were also a former athlete too, so we'll talk all about that. Um, but yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to have you on. So, man, I don't know. What's the first question that I ask you here? Do you want to address anything that I've mentioned so far?
um, you know, so I remember the workout really well. Were you at the lacrosse tournament at A&M? Maybe.
Yes, I broke my rib there. I That
Okay.
was the first time I broke a rib, and I didn't do anything for it. Just
So
broke a rib.
that might have predated that first workout. Um,
Okay.
but I don't know if you know this. I was out with Gary and Justin, another mutual
Hmm.
friend,
Yeah.
and it was like a Friday night. We were down at the bars, and they were like, "Hey, you should come out and play some lacrosse with us tomorrow." And I'd never played. I'm from the Northeast, from Pennsylvania originally. Knew nothing about lacrosse other than that it was a sport basically. And after a few drinks, they got me to agree to come out. So I woke up the next morning and I was driving up to A&M, and like we were on the phone and they were literally explaining to me the rules of lacrosse
Oh
and how
my
to play.
gosh.
And in my head, I was going to just like a fun scrimmage. I didn't even know if pads were in that mental picture that I had. And I showed up and it was like full on legit tournament. Everyone's, geared up, pads,
Hmm.
jerseys, and
Yeah.
just kind of jumped in and played with you guys. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that was not a every men's lacrosse experience I've had has not been um it's intense. None of them have been like, "Oh, we're just here to like lightly play." It's always intense. Um and as long as we're talking about that A&M tournament, I actually got in a fight at that A&M tournament like with 2 minutes to go. Like someone made like an unnecessary hit, and I got up and I punched the guy right in the face, and like all and both teams like ran onto the field. I remember one of our other friends, I don't know if you remember Murph like had to dive to save me from the guy who was attacking me. And then the refs ran off the field. They were like, screw this, we're done. um and then I was like, okay, I got to stop watching boxing highlights on YouTube because I'm thinking that this is acceptable behavior now to just like start a fist fight in a men's lacrosse game. So, anyways, that was a fun
Yeah,
experience.
it was a hoot, man. It gave me a nice appreciation for the sport. Definitely had a blast. But it kind of goes into the way I like to approach things anyway. That was one of those things, and I think this is, um, you know, good segue into the startup stuff as well. It's just like I knew that I had no business being on that field, but it was an experience that I thought would be fun and wanted to have. So just kind of jumped in. You do whatever thinking and research you can, the short period of time going into it, and then you just kind of experience it. And there's a quote I really like. It's buy the ticket, take the ride. And I've tried to
Mm,
incorporate that into my life a lot, especially in my younger years.
nice. I'm writing this down. By the way, I love note cards. I don't know about you, but I have like hundreds of note cards on my desk, and this is just how I
Yeah.
keep track of my life and my thoughts. Buy the ticket, take the ride. Um, yeah. So that kind of leads me into my next question, and I do want to get into, we're definitely going to get into, how you think and a lot of your mindsets because I'm interested in all of that. But I told you this, but one question I wanted to ask you was, what did you do? What's something ridiculous that you bought? I hope it's, I mean, I told you, I hoped it was something like extremely extravagant, flamboyant, unnecessarily expensive. Um, but what's something that you did after you did, sell TrendKite?
So I told you a little bit about this, but it was interesting. Right after that sale, there's a guy that is a good friend of mine back in Pennsylvania. His name's Johnny Broom, and I remember chatting with him about the influx of cash that was coming in, and his advice to me was like, my nickname's Curly. You can't really tell now, but I used to have like a real big blonde, kind of crazy afro when I was playing college sports, and that's when I met these guys. So they'll call me Curly, and he's like, Curly, like wait 6 months before you spend any money on something. And if you still
Mm,
want to, go for it, but don't just spend it right when you get it. And it was really, really good advice, I think, because what it did is it kind of locked in this mentality of, being comfortable sitting on cash and like buying something because you really want it, not because it's just like cash is available. So what I ended up doing was I took his advice. I did go on a pretty baller trip. She was my girlfriend at the time, wife now. We went down to Turks and Caicos. We stayed in Turks and Caicos for like a week, and then we did a week down in South Caicos, where you take like a little small puddle hopper flight. And that island was really cool. It's like super remote, and just had like a real proper celebration trip. And that for me kind of it cemented in, all of the work over the, better part of the last decade. I did a whole bunch of reflection on that trip as
mm,
well. Because you don't go through something like that without having some demons from the process as well. It's like you got to take your brain to some pretty serious places to be able to stick around and put in the work every day consistently for that long period of time. And then, you
mm,
have co-founder dramas, and we hired in executives, and I hired in a professional CEO to come into the business. So there were lots of things that I felt like I wanted to really process and kind of let go through the proper mental process of figuring out like how did I feel about that, and what was I going to do with that thought moving forward,
mm,
because this is something I've done my whole life is when something traumatic happens, I really think there's two different places people go with those things. It's like they either use it to create all of the excuses for everything for the rest of their lives, like, oh, well, I'm this way because of that. Like, woe is
mhm,
me. Or they take that thing and they use it to empower them and then go out and do something because it's like, oh, I went through that, learned about it, or it was hard. So now I can go do these other things. So I've always been one to look at that fork in the road and go to the latter side of it. But we did that trip and then came back. I bought a Ford Raptor, so that was like my dream
yeah,
truck.
I
Um,
remember that. Yeah.
and I still to this day am obsessed with that thing. It's like the perfect blend of like luxury, sport. It just looks badass too. Like in my opinion, there's like more powerful throatier trucks out there now, but I don't think anything looks more badass than a Raptor. Um,
Is this the blue one? I think I've what
Now
color is it?
I got a dark gray
It's
one.
dark gray.
Yeah.
Okay. Thinking of something else. Anyways, um
Um,
so
but we
you
did.
had one purchased somewhat.
Yeah, and well, then we bought a house too. Uh,
Okay.
so I was able to, real fortunately, was able to pay for that house in cash
Mm,
to make the deal a little bit better. And then I ended up, we don't have to get into all this stuff, but I ended up, refinancing it after because interest rates were so low. It's better to have that cash. But um,
yeah.
I'd say those, if I think of the buckets of like where that money went over the subsequent probably like year, those were like the big things that I did.
Yeah. Well, I like that you brought up taking time for reflection, because I think that's something that is really hard to do, especially when, since 2000, let's date it like 2008, 2009, when smartphones, became a real thing. And it's so hard to be bored, so hard to just have, you know, so easy to be distracted. So I'm curious, was there something, can you remember when you started doing that? Is there a particular influence? Is there something that you read or what, you know, how did you, when did you start? Why did you start doing reflection?
Yeah, there wasn't really. This will take me back because I started. I think it was like right after I graduated college is when I really started to do that. I started listening to Tony Robbins pretty young,
Hmm.
probably in my teenage years. Probably a little bit even before I was like 16 years old. I started listening to the Tony Robbins. His like they were CDs back then, the CD
Yeah.
series. Um, but I cranked through those things and just always had, I think, a zest for self improvement. Um,
Hmm.
so I always focused on those things, but I didn't really start getting into like the deep journaling and thinking through things probably until after college. And the reason for that is, you go through grade school, you go through college, life's kind of on like play more or less, right? It's like you go to second grade because you're supposed to go to second grade. You go to college or you go, get a job after high school because that's just what people do.
Hmm.
But once you get out of college, outside of going to hunt down that first job, you're kind of set free to figure out, where do you want your life to actually go? And I think for me, as I was doing my first startup, which was not doing well, it just caused me to really reflect and be like, whoa, like, am I really doing what's best for me? Because at that time, I was living in my co founder's unfinished basement in Blandon, Pennsylvania, and that guy's still one of my best friends to this day. Like we're like brothers, and I think this experience really helped codify that relationship together. But back then, I was fresh out of school. It was 2008 financial crisis. I had an
Hmm.
economics degree, a minor in engineering entrepreneurship. um, what I should have been able to do is like, go get a job on Wall Street or something. It's kind of like I went to Penn State. It's like what a lot of Penn State folks do is they go work for one of the big firms. Um, but I was unable to get a job even when I
Hmm.
tried. And as I was doing the startup stuff, just really struggling, there were lots of times where I would just kind of sit and question like, whoa, is this like really what I should be doing?
Hmm.
Because the anxiety and everything back then was just like, through the roof because
Mm.
you got all of your friends, family telling you like, hey, you should really be going and getting a job because nobody wants to see you suffer. And I can tell you, like, those years are definitely some of my suffer years for sure.
Hmm.
It's like I had no cash. When I say unfinished basement, no heat down there. So I had like one of those little plug in radiators next to an air mattress that was up on a metal frame. I had like four sleeping bags. You think of wintertime now as like, 20, 30 degrees or lower. And it was like bone chillingly cold down there some days and nights. And no windows, cobwebs, spiders.
Yeah.
Just
Everyone
it's
everyone needs that struggle story as an entrepreneur though, right?
yeah, I think so, man. But going through that, I think is really what started my deep reflection into just like, okay, what is this world that I'm creating for myself? And it
Hmm.
caused me periodically throughout the rest of my life to just I check in pretty regularly to just to make sure that I'm not only doing the things I want to do, but also thinking the way that I want to think.
Got it. So you being in a difficult position, in that difficult situation, is what, from what I'm understanding, is what led you to really start questioning things, start reflecting on things, and making sure that, hey, is this like, this is where I want to go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's great. And that's something that that's a common theme that I've heard, or that's something that I heard on a show I did recently. One of the guys I had on here, who's actually my coach slash, gives me programs my workout program. He said he went on like a 262 canoe paddle, 262-mile canoe ride,
Wow.
and said he's like, yeah, when you're doing that, you question things, you question life. So that's that's great. I remember when I first moved here, I had a really crappy job. I had the same situation. So I graduated 2000. Well, I graduated 2012. So at that time, it was still, the economy was still like, and people weren't hiring. I had trained to be in government, so I spoke Turkish. I had then been learning Persian. I had worked at the U.S. Embassy in Turkey, so I had kind of like a, like a foreign officer, or like something with, foreign affairs training. And no one was hiring in the government. Sequestration was in full effect. I couldn't find a job doing anything related to what I wanted to do. So I took a job in Austin doing third party logistics, which is basically you call companies that use trucks and you say, I can find you a truck. And they say, okay, you call those other truck companies and see if you can do it. And then you make your living based on the price you negotiate from, the carrier and the person who's using the carrier. um but anyways, that was a job where I had to severely change my lifestyle. Like, you had to start, oh wow, oh, this meat's only $1, this meat's $3, I'm gonna get the $1 meat. And like going through that, and really, like, like $50 was like, oh my gosh, $50, like that's a huge difference in like your monthly spending. um but ultimately, because I was getting paid so little, that was what encouraged me to, hey, if I can just train two people a day, I'm making the same amount of money I am if I do that other thing. So I'll probably do that. Um, but yeah, anyways, that was just what was coming up for me when you were talking about that. So when you were at Penn State, you were a walk on for track and field,
Yeah, so
which is
I was a walk on for track and field, and then I tried to walk on to the varsity volleyball team as well. So I did 3 years of club there, and then I got to play with the varsity guys for the better part of a month. Back in 2008 was when I got to play with them. They won a national championship that year, but I ended up getting cut before we
mm.
jumped into competition.
But your practice with that team was invaluable and contributed to their championship winning.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
That's the claim.
I caused everyone to look at me and say, we can't let him on the team. We got to step it up.
Yeah. So I'm an athlete too. I played collegiate lacrosse, and I'm kind of curious, how does your background in sports kind of relate to your drive with other things?
Yeah. So, I credit a lot of my work ethic to a few different things, but one of them most closely tied to sports. I spent a lot of time with my friends growing up. So this will go even before college, but back in I think it was sixth grade, I met one of my friends, Chris Ramos, who was a really top-notch wrestler. He wrestled at UNC, he's part of like the top recruiting class in the country back then, back in 2004. And him and I grew up. We had a couple other buddies too. It was like me, Chris, Danny, Jared, Toby, Sawyer. We had like our little crew of fellow athletes, and really, I think Chris just kind of pushed us, man. Like it didn't matter what we were doing. Like we weren't, we didn't grow up on our cell phones and have devices back then in our generation. So we
Hmm.
were just out and about constantly. So we would either be, out running trails in the gym, lifting weights, playing, some sport that wasn't even the sports that we played. Like we played a lot of tennis. We played a ton of beach volleyball. back when we were little kids, and we would always play against the older kids. So I think I always just wanted to be the best at whatever I was doing. So I think that was
Hmm.
inherent in my personality from a very young age. And then when I met Chris, who felt the same way, but he was also just like, he was kind of like a freak athlete at our age. Like, dude was just always shredded, and pretty
Hmm.
strong. So when I met him, it just, I think, pushed me and pushed me, in everything that we did. So as that jumped into sports, you think about, like, I played volleyball in high school as my primary sport, and playing volleyball, it isn't like the most. It's not like a football mentality. It's not like what people think of when they think of like the real competitive sports, but it was for me. Like, I treated it that way. I was a shorter guy, so I'm like 5'11",
Oh
6 foot with
man,
some good shoes on.
if 5'11" is shorter, I'm in trouble.
Well, for volleyball, it is.
For volleyball, okay, yeah.
Yeah, like most of those guys, to be like an outside hitter D1, you're talking probably 6'3" at the very low end, 6'5", 6'7" is kind of average. So,
Hmm.
like on the club program at Penn State, I played as an outside hitter because I just worked my butt off with my vert. I used to be able to reach 11 feet, and I could get up there and I could play. But at the varsity level, like, I had to try out as a libero with the varsity guys because even though I could get up as high, it's like that split second that they can get up there faster makes all the
Mm,
difference at that level. It's just such a fast game. So, I guess to answer your question, for me with sports, I was always kind of an underdog with them. So I always had a
mm,
chip on my shoulder, and it caused me to work harder than the guys next to me, almost all the time. And I think that's what created this kind of drive and work ethic for me, where as I saw the fruits of that labor, it kind of fused that mental connection for me of like, if you work harder than other people, you can, compete at the same level or greater.
hmm. Yeah, that's bringing up a couple things. I'm writing my questions down, but I was shorter growing up. I was just behind. I was like probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches shorter than most people growing up, um, and but I was always like, I tried to be the fastest, and I usually was the fastest. So I wasn't big, but I always tried to be the fastest, and I was always very physical. So whatever the sport was, I was in it. I was ready to fight, not fight like, but like I was ready to
Yeah.
push. I was ready to be physical. I was ready to be aggressive. Um, and I think that that definitely does give you a chip on your shoulder. Um, like you not having the gift of size, I think you definitely do have to push yourself harder. Um, and for me at least, like the ability to push yourself in a workout is probably one of the easiest things to push yourself in. Like if it's hard to push yourself through, like if you've been at work for 5 hours and you're like, oh, I got to go for 30 more minutes. It's hard to push yourself for 30 more minutes and stay focused. But if you're already in a workout and you're like, I've got one more minute of this, you're like, I can push myself for 1 minute. So like being able to be in a workout, be in that environment, and teaching yourself I can push myself a little bit further. I can do more than what I'm doing right now. I think that I think that translates really really well into, other situations where you're struggling.
Yeah. It also brings up just like the discipline side of things, right? It's like so like for me, I didn't have a father that was really active in my life with my sports at all, right? So I had to be a big time self starter with all those things and figure out, what was my training program going to be, how much was I going to be training, um, and as you create that discipline around that work schedule, like, I think that's really what you learn that, transcends the sports and the workouts and goes into, your day-to-day job or whatever it is. It's just like, a lot of people think of discipline as this like really intense thing sometimes, or like a limiting thing, or not. They don't really associate it with freedom. I'm a big Jocko Willink fan. I'm not sure if you follow him at
Yes,
all,
I've read
but
the book.
okay. So when he talks about, discipline equals freedom, like,
Hmm.
all of that stuff just has always really resonated with me. It's like, how do you free up time for yourself? Have a more disciplined time management system,
Hmm.
and you kind of go through the whole gambit with those things. But yeah, to answer your question, I think, like, chip on the shoulder plus work ethic and discipline, the team side of things, working with the teams and the sports and everything. I just can't say enough positive things about what sports do for your mentality for like the rest of everything else in your life, really.
Yeah, totally agree. So, what I'm thinking of now is, when you were in the height of, I mean, I have no idea how acquisitions work. I don't. That's startup world is not my world. Um, Even though I technically am a startup, I don't live in that world of getting seed money and all those other things that go with getting acquired, all of those things. So I'm curious, when you were, let's say you were at the height of your busyness with TrendKite, and were you running other things at the time, or were you like 100% in with TrendKite? When
100% trend
when
kite.
Okay. So when you were in, at the busiest time you were in with TrendKite, what was your work life balance like? I mean, you know, talking about discipline. Discipline is sticking with things that you plan on doing and not really worrying about whether you're motivated or not. But how did you balance that with, the internal resistance to like, I really don't want to do this, but I have to keep doing this. So, that's something that I'm really interested in is the work life balance, but balancing that with discipline and actually listen to yourself. Do I really want to keep doing this?
So the interesting thing about that, I'll put it in two different buckets. So there was like really early stage trend kite, which I just learned about myself. Like I'm an early stage guy. I don't really love the later stage of companies, at least so far from my experiences. Now that could change, but there was like the early stage trend kite experience, and then there was the later stage. And my strategies and kind of tactics for how I handled work life balance were different for each of them. So early stage, I didn't really have what you're talking about as far as like having to like talk myself into enjoying the work. In fact, I almost enjoyed the work too much. I became pretty obsessive about it. Like um,
Mhm.
back in those days, I was a single bachelor, so I worked like nonstop, and then I partied a bunch and repeated, and that was my life. It was just like I was just constantly on. So
How did we not? Because I was in that party stage too for a while. Did we? Did was I just was I just too inebriated and didn't like remember, or were we just not together?
we crossed paths a few times at like
Okay.
Wade's pool parties. I think we saw
Oh
each
yes.
other
Okay. Yeah.
a few
All right.
times at those things,
Those were
but
those were fun.
yeah,
Yes, Wade. Wade, you get your plug again. Real estate with Wade. Need a house in Austin.
it's who we've used a few times successfully.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
there you go, Wade. Um, but yeah, so with that, what I will say, so the work life balance was different for me then. Like the thing that I struggled with really was working too much, being on too much, and being
Hmm.
like too ingrained in the business, and I actually had to pull myself away from it. Whereas later in the company, those roles kind of flipped. So
When you
early on,
realized when you're too much into it, how did you realize that? What did that feel like?
it was like crippling levels of anxiety, basically. Like
Hmm.
I felt like I was like paralyzed with too much, like too many open loops in the brain. So
Hmm.
it's like, oh, I need to do this. What about this relationship? What about these people we're hiring? Do they get along? What's the office environment like? How's the lighting? What's the sound like? What music are we playing? Like you think of all these little micro decisions
Hmm.
all day, and unless you have a way to properly manage them and kind of move them off your plate and through your brain, they hang. And what I found
Hmm.
is that when they when they kind of gathered to too high of a level, I was basically incapable of like squashing them down. And I lived with just
Hmm.
like mind crippling anxiety for over a year. It was honestly, it was pretty
Wow.
brutal. Yeah, it was like I
Yeah.
felt like I was having like back to back panic attacks like nonstop every day for over a year, if you can imagine that. Like
Wow.
it was torture.
That's really tough. I mean, I'm just thinking of, decision paralysis. You hear about that. But also like when you're in that stage when everything looks like a good opportunity, it's 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 bad because there's just you're not focusing on just one thing. You've got 100 things that you're trying to choose from, and it's just You just got to pick a thing
Yeah. Well,
eventually. But
plus, and like the other really important ingredient there is you got to think about like first time founder, first time raising over $1 million for a business.
mhm,
Um, Back then I was founder CEO. So like all the weight of that is on your shoulders. And I think those two things combined just created a really toxic headspace for me back then that I had to
mhm.
learn how to kind of deal with and, make sure I didn't repeat that again moving forward.
Did you delegate things well at that time, or do you have to learn to delegate things well? Were you scared of giving up control, or um, did you start off? What was your managing kind of style, and how did that affect your mental well being?
So my management style has always been I'm like the opposite of micromanage. I like to hire smart people and kind of set them
Mm-hmm.
free to do what we hired them to do. So it's like, hey, here's the problem. Here's how I'm thinking about it. I might give some direction,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like you figure it out. Like this is
Yeah.
why we brought you in. So I've always been really good at delegating from that standpoint. But I think the thing that I've always struggled with is even if I delegate one of those things, then for me it's just like, oh, I just opened up a new slot, so now I can throw something else onto my plate. So my
Okay.
delegation process was just like, move something off, move something else in. So I never really cleared my plate.
Gotcha. And then in terms of after you delegated something, do you find that if you found the right people, did you have to maintain, like, was there a lot of, what's the word I'm looking, was there a lot of maintenance work, so to speak, involved in making sure that they had the same vision, or you shared a vision, or was it just like, you do this, here's what you do, go on your own, and I don't have to like check in with you?
Yeah, no, it was more that I think for
Mm,
myself and my co-founder AJ, back in those days, we were really big like storytellers and vision-based people. So I think everyone was already always aligned to what we were trying to do as a business, and as
mm-hmm,
entrepreneurs and as an organization. But um, yeah, I think where it gets difficult is just the business changes so fast. So as you bring people in and they start doing the things that you brought them in to do, the business like overnight can change dramatically where all of a sudden maybe you don't need that person doing that thing anymore, or maybe you need a completely new person, new skill sets. And then as you're trying to maintain, consistency in your culture, as you have to bring people in and on and off that bus, I think that's really challenging as a early founder because you really want to make sure you get that right in the early days. Because once you hit a
mm,
certain scale, the bus is kind of moving forward, and the people really are what dictate your culture. It's not us
mm.
talking about what we think of the world as much anymore. So those first early hires are super critical.
Gotcha. So after you had that initial, not that initial, or but after you had that year long, or that however long it was, of just feeling completely anxiety ridden, did you have another, was there another period where you felt like you were just doing way too much work? um when did that happen, and how did you realize that was if it happened, I guess,
Yeah.
did it happen?
No, it didn't really happen. Not like it did before. So I had a CEO coach, and he always told me, he's like, Matt, listen, as the business grows and scales, um, things will become more stressful, but you will become less stressed. And that sounds like kind of a weird thing to say, right? But what he
Hmm.
said is basically, as the business grows, there's going to be more things going on and more things that cause stress, but you're going to have more and more brilliant people around you to work on those things. And as long as you trust them, then that stress drops off dramatically. So as we scaled, I felt that big time. And, especially as we
Mm-hmm.
hired out our executive team. I mean, I was 25 when I started TrendKite, and you know, AJ and I were the only 25, 26 year olds on the executive team. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
else was quite a bit like double our age, probably at least.
Yeah.
So once we had that experience in from an operational standpoint, I think that freed up a lot of our kind of anxieties around things. But you know, it, I wouldn't say that the stress and anxiety ever goes away on those things because it's just like it's always high. You just figure out better ways to manage it, cope with it. You can change what it means to you as well. So, um, like back then, the meaning for me, because I was coming off of like you have to think back to where I came from, where it was like I had no money, was living off of like maybe 11, 12,000 bucks a year for like 5 years, in and out of people's basements and guest bedrooms. Sometimes I didn't even have enough money for like a Wendy's meal. So when you raise that cash and then that comes in, you have all this stress and pressure. It's like you think of your reputation. Like there's so
Hmm.
much on the line that I think back then it just had such a significant meaning in my brain that if I messed anything up, it was just gonna like put me back in the basement kind of mentality, you know?
Hmm.
Whereas as we grew and as I pulled a little money off the table, I was able to just really squash that belief system. And it's just like, hey, these things are really important, but they don't have to be life or death for me.
Hmm.
And I can treat these things with the same level of intensity, work ethic, thoughtfulness, just without the baggage of it wearing me out in the process, if
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So it sounds like people, like getting the right people on board, enabled you to be able to grow. I mean, not just the business, but you know, free up your time so that you could, continue to do what was important to you.
Yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
I told you things flipped. So that was like early TrendKite. As we scaled and grew the business, um, my tactic changed from like I don't think it's a secret that I didn't really agree with a lot of the things that the CEO that I brought in thought directionally for the business. I think
Hmm.
overall we were aligned that we wanted it to grow into, something awesome. And generally speaking, we got there, but there was lots of us just kind of like dragging each other through the hallways over a lot of different decisions to get there. So by the end of TrendKite, I just didn't really like being there anymore, man. It's like I had
Hmm.
to, it was a very different company when we exited than the first 5 years that we were in business. And what it took for me to, so that's where it switched. Like I had to convince myself to go in and do the work still. And for
Hmm.
that, I had to tell myself a story like every day. It's like, all right, why am I going into the office today? It's
Hmm.
like, what's the thing that's going to actually get me excited to focus on the work that I know needs to be done for us to have the best chance at a good outcome? Because those outcomes aren't, it's kind of like assumed. You raise a bunch of money, you get to a certain level of annual recurring revenue coming in. As long as your churn isn't too bad, like you're probably going to have a good exit. But those things, they aren't guaranteed. So I found that where the stress and kind of anxiety just kind of stays with you until you actually exit is really around just like making sure that like, I'm still thinking, are we doing the best and right things for this business to have the best outcome for all those shareholders by the end
Hmm.
of it?
Yeah. I mean, that sounds really tough. Uh, Starting something and then seeing it change and then still being there and having to push yourself through that. I mean, did it feel kind of like burnout at that point, or was
Yeah,
it
it was like beyond burnout. It's like
okay?
burnout happened probably in, I don't know, sometime in 2018, I would say. And then my
Okay.
co-founder left the business to start a new one. And most of our early employees were gone. So it was just like kind of me hanging out there with our executive team. And we were a big company. We were like 300 employees.
Hmm.
But at that point, I didn't know or have a relationship with a bunch of them. And it
Hmm.
was really like those early people that I think kind of kept me hanging around there. And then I'm just a big like finish what you start kind of guy. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to bail on it.
Hmm.
And it was just kind of brutal. It was super fun, man. I mean, like we had so much fun in the glory days of that thing. And even when I look back and reflect on the later days, those were still some of my favorite memories of the company, which is kind of weird too, because you start to realize like a big party doesn't have to be what leads to the best times. Like the learning and growth opportunities can sometimes be what leads to your favorite times at a business like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So finishing what you start. That sounds like a value. I just want to mention my experience with that because I've always been a finish what you start kind of person too, like to the point that it's been detrimental. Like I think I've held on to relationships in the past just because I'm like, I'm in it, I'm gonna get, and thinking about that now, I was like, why would I say to someone, why would I stay with someone that long if I didn't want to be with them, um, or or I think in other things too, I would just feel like, okay, I started, so I have to keep going. So that's one thing that I feel like I've actually done well is like, okay, you don't have to keep doing this. You can stop. But I'm kind of curious about some of your other values and whether or not you place, how much self-worth did you have wrapped up in the success of your business?
As far as like if I left, would things have still went the same?
In
Like what's my
general,
role?
no, no, like, but like, what's in general, like, how much did you base your feelings of success and your feelings of self-worth and,
I gotcha.
on your professional career?
I mean, if I said anything other than a high amount, I'd be, not being truthful about it. I think even to this day, I still place a lot of value on those things because it's kind of like, as a man, I feel like, your word is really important and
Hmm.
your reputation is really important and the way that you attack things. So, like, I agree with you. Like, it is great and necessary to quit things sometimes, but not just because they're hard, right? It's like
Hmm.
if you quit them because you're like tapping out on something, from like a place of it's just like hard or uncomfortable, and you just don't want to push anymore. If it's like really impacting your mental health or something, like I get that side of it, but I think for me, the values that I had around my sense of self-worth were probably pretty high as it related to, you know, even to this day, like what I do professionally. Because
Hmm.
I kind of correlate those things as like my work ethic, who I am,
Hmm.
all of that goes into, especially when you raise money, you tell people, hey, I'm going to take your money and go do something
Hmm.
great with it. So um, I do still feel on one hand, I've talked to some of the top investors in the world, and a lot of them have the mentality of like, hey, we're all adults here, especially like a pre-seed, early seed round. If you try something, it doesn't work out, like it's okay, like no big deal. And I think I've matured in that sense. But like what I just wouldn't be able to deal with is like if I took someone's money and then just decided like, I'm just not really having fun with this anymore. Like, you know,
Yeah.
no thanks.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to make any assumptions. So instead I'll say, or I'll ask, so that how did the sale? I'm assuming that's like, I'm talking about this like this is the defining moment of your, I mean, it's probably a big one. It is a big one, obviously. But did you continue to feel the same way about, how in terms of not equating, that's the wrong word, but in terms of how much importance you placed on your success and how you felt about yourself? Did that event change that, or did
It
it just
it actually
reinforce it?
it actually did, and I think you see people go in both directions here as well, right? It's like some people will go through something like that, and it is their defining moment, and they
Hmm.
like they're the founder that had the exit. That's who they are. Now they're going to go do the next one, and it's like they create their whole brand around themselves as the successful entrepreneur or executive or whatever it is. It's like they really identify with that business relationship. What I did was after reflecting a bunch, like I actually went the other direction where for me, I started seeing a lot of, people that stick around in that environment for the wrong reasons for too long. I just
Hmm.
watched a lot of executives just go through like heart wrenching family problems, personal problems. You see addiction problems. It's just, to me, it's like you start these businesses and you start doing these things for these reasons. And I've just seen too often people just do it for too long for the wrong reasons, and all of a sudden it's like what they were doing it for in the first place has been sacrificed. It's like, oh, I want to make all this money so that I can have a great life for my family, and then it's
Hmm.
like they have the family but they're still in the work grind and don't unplug it all, and now the family's like, you
Right.
know not
And
even.
and I'm asking this because that's the trap that, most people want to avoid, but it's also the trap that I feel like most people fall into. So what did you do that help prevent you from falling into that trap?
So the biggest thing is, so like I'm doing another startup right now. I've raised
Hmm.
money. It's like just as serious for me with this one as it was for TrendKite. I don't tie my sense of like self-worth anywhere near as much to this one. But like I said,
Hmm.
it doesn't change my work ethic or like the dynamics of how I build this thing. But what I do, man, is I just make sure that I balance my time out. So it's like, and I'm really fortunate to be married to a great woman now, where it's like, if I'm spending too much time in the weeds on my business, like she's going to let me know, and I'm going to feel some, some pressure
Hmm.
and pain from that side of it. That it's like, hey, you need to chill with that a little bit and come back to this side. Um, I've just seen like I'm a big modeling guy, and it's like when I look at the happiest, in my opinion, most successful people on the planet, it's the folks that have great families and friendships at the end of the day. So it's
Hmm.
like if you do a really good job on the business side and you make a bunch of money, then you can potentially really enrich those experiences with the people that you care about. But like the greatest tragedy would be to make all that money, but then not have anybody to go back and, share those moments and experiences with. So,
Yeah.
for me, I prioritize the family side of things now, making sure I maintain good friendships with the people that I love and care about. And then it's like all this business stuff now just gets to enhance that. And I'm lucky that I was one of the lucky guys to have a good exit and be able to create some space. I think is why I was able to think that way.
Hmm.
Because a lot of guys just they just keep going, and it's like if you don't give yourself the space to realize what's going on around you, then it's really really hard to notice that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I really want to ask you if there's anything more that you can share about being able to create that space. Because I mean, personally, I struggle with that. Like, let's say I do something really cool for Manful Yoga. Something goes really well. And then I'm like, cool, let's do something else. There's no like, hey, let's celebrate this. Let's actually appreciate this. Let's actually try and feel gratitude for this. I'm wondering if there's anything that, how can you practice that, giving yourself that space?
So yeah, there's a few different things that I do. One of my favorite things to do, and you can do this like even in the middle of all the chaos, is Tony Robbins has he calls it his morning priming exercise. So if you get in
Hmm.
YouTube and type in, Tony Robbins priming exercise, it's like this 12 to 15-minute meditation that he does every morning. And for me personally, my favorite part of that meditation is it's this like 3-minute segment of it where you just picture what you want your life to be like. So it's like,
Mm.
think of 1 to 3 things that, could be small or could be big, that you just want to go a certain way and just like sit with that. So I think what that does is it creates like a pretty crystal clear North Star, at least for myself, where when my life feels like you just feel it in your core, when things are off balance, it's like if you're spending too much time on something or you're giving something too much weight. Um, and that morning meditation always kind of just like reconnects me. But then anytime I'm on a trip, like I always have a journal with me on every trip
Hmm.
that Marissa and I go on, and like my favorite thing to do usually is like a good morning coffee journal session. And
Mm.
anytime I'm feeling just like flustered or anxious, like if my anxiety starts going up again, I've learned that don't just let it go off the rails. Like pause, like if I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'll pause and I'll do some good journaling. I use
Hmm.
MindMeister is a good mind mapping
Okay.
software. I use Asana for kind of
Mindmeister.
like task management. MindMeister is awesome though because I can just sit down on the computer and just like my brain kind of goes off in a bunch of different directions rapidly.
Hmm.
So I can just create these little nodes of like, okay, like house stuff, car stuff, relationship stuff, work stuff. And then it's like you can kind of bounce around and just come up with like, all right, what are the open loops in my mind that I need to really
Mm.
deal with for this? And then you can create like, what are the like a list of the things you need to do. And usually I'll take that list, throw it into Asana, and then I have like it gives my brain the sense of peace because I'm like,
Hmm.
I don't need to manage it. Like the system is managing all the stuff that I need to worry about.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of closing off the open loops. Like if I feel like I'm not if I feel like I'm anxious or I feel like, it's near the end of the workday and I'm just like, where am I right now? Closing those open loops is a huge. Have you heard of it's called the uh, like the shutdown process or the work? What is it called? It's Cal Newport. Cal
Okay,
Newport has this thing called the
I'm not familiar.
shutdown or the work shutdown process, but it's basically this process of like marking off where are you with all these major things that you're going on and like saying, okay, this is where I am, this is what I need to do next. Or it's a work shutdown. That's what it's called.
Okay,
But it's basically, tying off the loose ends or like closing off those open loops so that you can, move into your home life, your family life and not feel, you know, stressed about it. So
yeah,
that resonates a lot with me.
yeah.
Um,
There's
Go
two other
ahead.
things that I just want to throw out to you that I've
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
please.
adopted from other folks that I think are important on this too. So there's another tech entrepreneur in town. He's working at one of the unicorn companies now, and we were talking about having kids and babies and how do you manage the intense work that comes with a startup, with also making sure you're there for your family. So like he had
Mhm.
a thing where it's like from 6 to 9, the kids are mine. It's like this thing that he says in his head. Um, and for me, it's I do it a little bit different, but the whole intention there is just like there's some chunk of time every single day, no matter what, that business is shut off, and I'm just there present with my family. So that's something that's been really important for me that I've focused on, and I just blanked on the other one. So it must not be as important as that one, but I'll
That's
throw it
a
out if I think of it.
that's a that's a Turkish phrase, is if you forget something, what you were about to say, that it wasn't that important.
That's right. You just let it
So
fly
so
away. It's gone.
so fun fact. Um, so two things that came up. I'm curious. You were talking, throughout this, you've been mentioning friends by their first and last names. Do you stay in contact with people that you've been great friends with from childhood? I mean, how many do you? Because it sounds like those relationships are really important to you. Do you maintain like weekly contact with these people or monthly or you know?
Yeah, so it varies. And for me, like the hardest part for me living in Austin, Texas, is I'm not from here, right? So it's like
Right.
most of my closest friends from childhood, like I have to be really intentional about how I keep in touch with them, and I'll tell you how I kind of manage each group that I have. Obviously, it's a lot easier for my friends here, but so I guess I have three buckets of friends. There's probably more, but like the big ones are my high school friends. So these are the kids that I've known since like some of them since second grade. It's like, how do I keep in touch with them? Then I've got my college friends and then my post college friends. So those are like my three buckets. And because of my nature of kind of bouncing around, I mean, I lived in Reading State College, Philly, and Pennsylvania. Then I was in Atlanta for a little bit, San Diego, Austin. Like every place that I've ever lived, I've developed really close friends with people for wherever that location is. And for my high school friends, we all professionally do things that are very, very different. Um, and I think I've been really blessed to be in a different financial situation than a lot of them. So for me, the intentional things are like we're in like a group text thing. So we text pretty much daily, something funny or just like something that's going on in our lives. I try to get those guys in on like an annual guys trip to do something.
Hmm.
It's really, really hard with them. I think they have like a very um, kind of negative thought about spending money and going on a trip, especially now that they're all married with kids now as well.
Mm.
So that's been difficult. So what I try to do is just meet them more where they are. So it's like, okay, cool. Like, because usually I'm like, hey, I'll pay for it. Like, let's just go somewhere, do whatever. But because that's difficult, I'm like, okay, how about I come into Reading, Pennsylvania for a night, and let's just hang out and do whatever you guys want, to just kind of keep that, because we don't relate as much on our day-to-day lives today as we did back then, but the history that we have is, I think, so important to all of us. Like I consider those guys my brothers, and I know they consider me the same. So we treat it probably more similarly to what you would treat a family brother relationship with those guys.
Hmm.
My college friends, I try to pop in and kind of same thing. Like um, there's one guy in particular. Every time I go back to Pennsylvania, like we'll link up in his town, but everyone's just scattered. So like people are like
Hmm.
literally all over the globe now. So I don't keep in touch as much with those guys as I wished I would. Um, but then my post college friends, some of them, like the guy that I lived in his basement. So what I do intentionally is I have a phone call with him, and so his name's Ron, and then my friend James. The three of us have a an ongoing like hangout call like this scheduled once a
Mhm.
month, and it's Ron's Filipino, James is black, and I think the meeting's called like a white guy, an Asian guy, and a black guy walk into a bar dot 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 or something like that. And that's our monthly hangout, and we talk for like
That's
I don't
cool.
know, hour and a half, 2 hours. But yeah, man, for mental health, I think I know one of the things that you wanted to ask me today is just like how
Mhm.
do what's like something that's plaguing men in general right now from a health standpoint. And I think with social media, with everything going on in the news, it's just like even like look at us right now. We're doing this over the computer. I think
Mhm.
it's incredibly easy for people to not be together in person, uh, doing things and connecting. And I think the best thing, like at the very top of the list, that men and probably women as well can do for mental health is just get together and play. There's a book I really like called Play It Away, and
Mm.
this person basically says like best thing anyone can do is just go play with their friends. Like we're not too different from when we were 5 years old. Like at the end of the day, we just want to get together with our friends and have some fun. And
Mhm.
that author actually says like that single thing alone is what can just put a bullet in the head of like anxiety, depression.
Yeah.
They go off on some tangents on things, but I think that's one of the things that is the hardest thing to do right now, but also the most
Mhm.
beneficial.
Yeah. No, that concept of play is something that keeps popping up. We had Aaron Alexander on the show, and he's got the Align podcast. He's a big fan of that, and I asked him like, "How do you start playing?" You know, because like as adults, we kind of have to relearn how to play. But one other thing that a phrase that's come up a lot in some conversations I've had is this idea that we're just adults living in children's bodies, or sorry, we're children living in adults' bodies. Like all of us are still kids at heart with kids' emotions and like big feelings, but we just have, you know, we've learned to impersonate adults. So, yeah, that idea of play being helpful makes a lot of sense, and it's a really popular one. Um, so your family. So oh, by the way, your wife's name is Marissa
Yep.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay, my wife's name is Marissa. We should have a Marissa convention.
Yeah.
That way we can hang out. Is it one S or two S?
She has
Two
two
S's.
S's. Yeah.
Two
Yours is
S's.
one, right?
Okay. Yeah. Oh no, they won't get along. Never mind.
Yeah.
They'll have
Does, does she
they
get
want us to be
Marisa?
two.
Does she get
She does
Marisa a lot?
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes, she does. Um, but so you had your son with Marissa 5 months ago, 4 months ago. How long now?
Just a couple days past 4 months now.
Okay.
September.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yes, and it sounds like he has the same temperament as my son, which is terrible. Or another, I'll say colicky or particular or however you want to describe it. So you are also going through the transition of, oh, I have free time, to, oh, I have no free time. Um, how are you dealing with that? How's that going?
It's good, man. It's a journey, for sure. Um, the the time piece of it actually isn't the hardest part for me. It's funny, I think you have kids and you can hear like what colic is before you have a child that has colic. And it's just like, oh, they're screaming a lot, and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds bad, right? But then when you actually have a child who has colic and they're screaming like at the top of their lungs for hours, and there's
Yeah.
like nothing you can do really to soothe it. Um, it's like a form of mental torture that it's like you realize that words in the English language start to have meanings that you like didn't even know before with some of this stuff, and it's like it's been such a great experience, but it's been definitely, one of the hardest things that
Hmm.
myself and for her for sure as well, like that we've ever done. So I think the big adjustment, the timepiece is tough. I have my startup. My wife just went back to work. We don't have a nanny or any help yet, so it's just the two of
Mhm.
us like trading off and doing the what I'll call like the normal grind. So that is very very difficult. But hands down, the hardest transition for us has just been dealing with an infant that is just constantly uncomfortable, screaming, and not really being equipped, for
Yeah,
how to handle that.
it's tough. And I'm like you. I'm from Ohio, from Pennsylvania, but now we're here in Austin. Is Marissa from? Where's Marissa from?
She's from right here, Buda, Texas.
Okay, cool. So at least you have family here. Um, but we had that situation where family is, at least my family's not here, your family's not here. So um, everyone's moving away from family, right? Because it's like you want to get away from your family. um, but then COVID happened, and now people are like, you know what, maybe being next to family isn't such a terrible thing. And having a child is one of those major life events where you're like, oh, you know what, having grandma and grandpa close by might not have been such a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
It's funny.
yeah.
So right after I graduated college, I was in the middle of doing all my startup stuff, and I spent I think it was a 3 month chunk out in San Diego, California. And I went out there. I had no money. I went out with a couple suitcases. Slept on the floor on like a towel my first couple nights, then got like a mattress
Mm,
from a shady company, like just to kind of paint the
comfy.
picture, yeah, of what this was like. But I'll tell you, man, I was in paradise over there. Living in Mission Beach. I woke up, I went out, checked the surf, jumped in the water. I just like surfed all day. And I go to the gym.
Wow.
It's like one of those cool, the windows are all open, all the fresh air is coming in. Uh,
Yeah.
Life was like super interesting and cool. Super active lifestyle out there. Like it's, in my opinion, it's one of the most fun, coolest places you can live like on this planet. And what I found though that was transformational for me was um, after those first 3 months, I was like, the vacation is kind of too long now. Like I'm ready to re-engage with like a more like business minded civilization is kind of how I felt. But I remember thinking to myself, home really is where your family is, in my opinion. So like I'm a little bit of a tortured soul here in Austin. I mean, I love it
Hmm.
here. I love my wife's family. Um, but not having that whole crew together, it's like I really miss that even as like a 22-year-old out in
Hmm.
San Diego. It's just like I remember thinking to myself like of all the places in the world, why did my family decide to plant down in central Pennsylvania? It's like
Yeah.
because they didn't really.
Home prices.
Yeah. Well, I feel like with social media and Airbnbs and everything, like people just didn't get to get out in the world like we're fortunate
Mhm.
to now. And I laugh. I'm like, come on, guys, like let's get the whole family go to a coast somewhere or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I send my family. I send my mom and dad. Zillow links and Redfin houses every now and then. I'm like, hey, this one looks nice. You know, you're almost 65. Maybe you should think about it.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, um, yeah, I've been unsuccessful, and I don't want to move back to the Midwest because there's no sun there.
Yeah.
And it's cold. Cold weather isn't terrible, but
The sun's a real
um,
thing though.
the sun, yeah. I actually have a vitamin D deficiency. I still do because my body never learned how to process sunlight because I grew up in Cleveland.
Hmm.
So, there's downside. But so you were talking about being active in San Diego, and I wanted to before we get to do this, I wanted to touch on you. You had your kind of oh shit moment when you realize you're like, hey, like I used to be an elite athlete, and now my body does not reflect an elite athlete. And now and then while you were at the height of all of this, you were going through 5 or 6 workouts per week. You were saying, and you put on, I don't know, the photos look great. We should definitely put in a link to this 12-month or 11 or 13-month journey I think you had, showing this month by month
It's
progress. But
about 11, I think. The
11
the
months.
pictures were 13 months though. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. So Yeah. Do you want to tell me when when you had that moment and what you did and how you
Yeah.
started that?
So the one thing about having money for the first time, the startup's going well, busy all the time, traveling to cool places, is I found myself just eating out all the time. So,
Mhm.
let's go pre-TrendKite, I was cooking pretty much every meal at home, and it was like just bare raw. It was like chicken breast and spinach basically because that's all I could afford. Brown rice,
Yeah.
the cheap stuff. But then as I was eating out more and more, this transformation probably happened over the course of a couple of years, and I just didn't really realize it. But I remember before I started this thing called precision nutrition, I went probably on average 3 out of 3 to 4 meals a day. I was doing like Uber Eats, Favor, Grubhub, uh,
Oh,
like
wow.
getting food delivered to my house, and I just like wasn't cooking anymore at all. And what's funny is when my wife and I got married, I went on this like little health kick where I was like, oh, you want to look good for your wedding day and your wedding pictures and whatever. So I got my weight down a little bit, but it must have been like a really unhealthy way to do it because um, very shortly after our wedding, so we went on our honeymoon and we were living large. I was just eating nonstop. Every meal I was just like filling up until I like couldn't eat anymore. And I got back from that thing, and so my fighting weight's probably like I don't know 155, 160. If I was
Mhm.
training for like a wrestling match or a boxing match or something, um, and I was up to 205 after that.
Wow.
So like I'd say my kind of regular weights, like probably in the 170s somewhere, but I was
Mhm.
205 and there was a picture from our honeymoon. I was out at some giant waterfall in Hawaii and I'm like bending over as I'm walking through this thing and I've just got this huge gut that's like hanging over my lap
This
and
this
I'm just like,
this wonderfully flattering photo.
yeah, and I looked at it, I said, "No way, dude. Like you are not going out like this." So,
Yeah.
so that
When was this?
that was probably like end of October 2019.
Okay.
So I decided
Cool.
like I got to start doing something. So I started working out pretty much like right away anyway.
Mhm.
And we can talk about that. Like that's just workouts my entire life up until that moment were just completely different and the mentality and everything just completely different. I
Mhm.
had to like basically relearn how to work out all over again. Um, But yeah, I went from 205 down to about 172 by the end of that competition. I won like a global, weight loss competition, which
Oh,
if you
wow.
asked me that a few years ago, like if I would have done that, like if I would even be competing in a weight loss competition, it's like, what are you talking about?
You would've been like, "I don't need to lose weight. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
That's funny. Um, but we were also talking about how you had to kinda change the way you work out because the way that you work out when you're in your early 30s versus the way that you work out when you're when you're training in college is really different. In college, you can just whether or not you can do the next rep determines like if you're going to keep pushing or not. But when you're 30, you're like, I could do a few more, but what's tomorrow going to feel like? So learning that, I don't know, at least for me, learning that, okay, you might be able to do this, but you shouldn't do this was a big adjustment. And, what was that like for you?
So when I think back to when I was a college athlete doing workouts, I'd say like the first 95% of the workout was just on like autoplay. It was just easy. It's like you go to the gym, you start doing your thing, whatever. And then it's
Mm,
like, it's that last rep, that transcendent rep where you, make or break yourself and edge yourself above the competition. It's like, that's where
mhm.
you really push yourself is just, how much pain can you endure at the end of
Yeah.
the exercise or workout or whatever. So the difference in mentality, it's like I remember when I was done running track at Penn State, I'd go out for a run. I had to retrain myself how to run because like the track mentality, like we're running splits that would like take you to states in high school as just like a casual workout
Wow.
when we were running. So I had to like tell myself it was okay to just jog, instead of
Hmm.
just hit the hammer. So with the
Yeah.
workouts, the big transition was like okay, don't just go in the gym and start, throwing the heavy stuff around. Don't have your intensity up to a 10. I had to tell myself it's okay to not even push myself on these, like this whole first week of workouts. Like, just get my body, get the fluids used to moving again, get used to just like
Mm,
being active. And then I increased that a little bit. And what I found is just like I would increase it a little more and a little more and a little more. And um and that's how I navigated that. And even the
mhm,
mentality side, like the psychological side of, like, when you're a D1 athlete, like, you're in pretty good shape for pretty much all those folks, right? It's like you look in the mirror, you
mhm,
feel good, you look good. When your body image is like really far off from where it was, and you think of all the hard work that went into that, there's like a real mental barrier to overcome to fight
mhm.
back to get into shape. So, it gave me a ton of respect for people that, you know, start somewhere not nice and get somewhere that they want to be as well. But it was a
Yeah,
grind, man. It was a lot harder for me to work out, lose the weight, get back in shape than it would have been to just keep grinding.
yeah. I mean, two things. So learning that appropriate intensity when you're first coming back is challenging because you want to feel like you're doing enough, right? But then you do whatever you do. You think you do enough, but then you're so sore the next day. You're like, "Oh, I think I maybe did too much." So then, at least for me, I got to this point where I was like, I think I'm doing too much. I'm like, I shouldn't feel this sore. And part of that was just learning, like, oh no, this is just how sore you're going to feel. So it was really hard to figure out, after taking off so many years of intense weightlifting, um, or just you know strength training, coming back in and figuring out, okay, what's like, where should I be aiming for with these workouts? And yeah, the big adjustment being you're not just going to push yourself as hard as you possibly can, um, every time. Um, yeah,
Dean,
go ahead.
one other thing that was like critical for me too is it's like I'm real big on identifying the patterns, right? It's like what are my habits that are causing me to behave a certain way? And I realized that my habit was I would go in the gym, I'd hit it hard for like, let's call it 1 to 3 months, and always by that 3 month mark, I was like back in pretty great lifting shape, felt good, was moving, and then every time, like, without skipping a beat, I would just like stop for some reason because
Hmm.
I was like I'm good, I don't need to go anymore, and my call it 4 to 5, maybe 6 days a week of consistent exercise would turn into 2 days a week. And then that would turn into
Hmm.
1 day a week. And before I knew it, I was
Hmm.
right back into those bad habits of just eating whatever, not exercising. So, what it really, I think, pushed in my brain and what I still cling on to is it's like, all right, what's my minimum amount of physical activity that I'm okay with every single day of my life? Like, it's more important
Hmm.
for me
Yeah.
to go in the gym. Even let's say I check into the gym and I just walk around in a circle. For me, that's better than if I don't go to the gym at all. So it's
Yeah.
like I need to just do something every single day is kind of what I've now got wired in my brain. And that has kept
Hmm.
me from falling off the cliff where it's like I go in these long periods of, inactivity or just not doing what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Atomic Habits has a kind of cool anecdotal story of this guy who wants to lose weight, and he gets started by just going to the gym and getting dressed. But his rule is he just goes to the gym and he just stands in the gym and then he goes home. And he does that for long enough that he gets into the gym one day and he's like, "Well, I might as well do something since I'm here." And then I think he lost like 100 pounds that year or something, but just from creating that repetition of just going into the gym, and yeah, so that makes total sense to me. Um, man, I have a couple questions here that I didn't ask you, but I want to go through kind of my rapid fire questions for you.
Yeah.
Um, and these are things that I'm asking most people in on the show. So, what do you think is one? And we've also covered a lot of this just throughout the conversation, but hopefully here we'll kind of we'll spell it out, so to speak. So, what do you think is one habit, a belief, a mindset, a practice that has helped you the most in terms of your overall happiness?
Uh, Two things. One, that anything's possible, and two, that I'm in total control over my own happiness.
Hmm. Yeah, like that. What's one thing you do for your health that you believe is overlooked or undervalued by other people?
I don't watch the news anymore, and I stay off social media.
Two very good things. I got off social media uh, a long time ago, uninstalled the apps. I still cheat and I go on my mobile browser, but it's a lot less enticing than, yeah. Um, do you have a set time for a regular stress relief activity? And what do you do?
For me, it's I walk my dog twice a day. That's really
Hmm.
therapeutic for me. That morning meditation I could put in that bucket, but then just like my
Hmm.
workouts, going to the gym, I it's funny. I What's peaceful for me is throwing on like some hard grungy rock and or rap and just or electronic music and just kind of grinding out a workout. It's like high
Yeah,
energy, but it's actually very therapeutic and chills me out.
yeah. I forgot to ask you this before, but has your morning routine stayed intact with what's your son's name again?
Ryan,
Ryan. Has it stayed intact at all? Has any of your routines stayed intact?
no, no. In fact, every time I try to recreate what I was doing before, it's just like, I mean, he's just, you never know when he's going to wake up and, need something. And the pieces are in my morning-ish afternoon, but sometimes it's
Mhm.
just like I have an evening routine instead of a morning routine, and it's good enough for now.
Yeah. I found I used to be a huge morning routine guy. I made tons of content, tons of pieces of content on morning routines. And now my morning routine is just waking up and immediately tending to, to Declan and making food for people. The extent of my morning routine is that I get to make a smoothie and coffee for myself. Um, Otherwise there is nothing left. Evening routines, that's where I actually get the opportunity to do things. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I'm really tired. So your evening routine isn't exciting as your morning routine
Well,
once
I
was.
so think about this though. It's like the whole point of a morning routine is to just drill in like discipline and habits to put you in the best place you can be for your life, right?
Yeah.
And what I think is really interesting, and I haven't really heard people talk about this, is it's like the traditional, morning routines that you hear from, the most, successful uh, folks on the planet. It's like it's very regimented around like waking up, getting the workout in, eating healthy, doing
Hmm.
the most important things for the business, whatever. That's usually what you hear. But like what I said earlier, my mindset has shifted where it's like family and friendships are the most important thing for me. So, waking up and tending to your child is the first thing in the morning. Like to me, that's a pretty awesome new morning routine. It's like you'll still get to the other
Yeah.
stuff in the day because of the discipline you have, but it's like why not prioritize the most important thing for yourself first thing in the morning?
Yeah. That's a good point. I should probably reframe the way I'm looking at that. Um, yeah. I mean, I do want to spend time with him, obviously. I enjoy spending time with my family. I just, yeah, I guess right now I just feel this. I still continue to feel like I have to like start working. I have to get to the things that I want to do so that I can finish by X time, and then I can focus on like the family. Then I can really relax. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I try to think of it as more of like a fluid thing where it's like right now, because he's a little colicky still, even at 4 months, like it's just not going to work for my wife and I, like to be happy if I'm like waking up at some hours and just going straight to the gym and then like, cool, like you deal with all the hard stuff with him first thing and see you when he's chill in the afternoon. So for me, it's like, all right, let me, be here, help now. And then hopefully in a month or two, once the colic dies down, like I'll have no problem waking up at, 4 or 5, get to the gym, get that done for the day. Because there is
Mhm.
something I do really still buy into getting that stuff done in the mornings because it's like for me, I'm always way more stressed because I'm thinking about the workout that I need to do if I
Yeah.
don't do it early in the morning.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I've always worked out. I do morning yoga. That's like something that I've been good about. But I've always worked out after work. I've always worked out like at 4 o'clock. That's just
Hmm.
when the weight room is open at school. That's just what I've gotten into the habit into. But I don't know. Maybe eventually that morning routine will include the big workout.
Well, that's
Um,
so I was the same as you, Dina. Like if you think about high school, college athletics, like that's
yeah,
usually when you work out. It's like after class.
right.
So it's like a little bit of a mental rewiring if you want to. You don't even
Yeah,
have to, but
true. Yeah, and like what you were talking about with, being there to help helping our Marissas. Um our yeah, I really had to talk about how important me working out again was with her, and it's still like especially when he was younger, it was like a big point of contention was me doing my workouts like in the late afternoon. Like the plan was always to start at 3 so I'd be done by 4, but sometimes I wouldn't start till like 4:30 and then I'd be, she'd be taking care of Declan by herself and I'd be like, "Okay, I'm just going to keep working out over here. I hope I don't get yelled at." Um but yeah.
yeah, it's
Um
so same thing on our side. I mean, I think the older we get with our relationships, you more you learn how much we live and die by communication with our
mhm,
spouses, right? And it's like I had to do the same thing. I had to sit down with Marissa and say like, hey, I know that working out for a lot of people is like a luxury and something that, it looks like they do in their free time. I was like, for me, this is actually imperative that I get this stuff done because if I don't exercise, my mental health is going to suffer dramatically. And that's just
mhm,
how I'm wired as a person. So I was like, so I really need for us to figure out like every day I need to find a time to get this in. And my flexibility is going to be like I don't care when it happens in the day, but I
mhm,
do need to make sure that I get it in, and that was kind of like how her and I were able to talk through it and
mhm.
provide a little give.
Yeah. What's nice is when you have those conversations, I don't know about you, but sometimes you go into it thinking like, "Oh, she's going to react this one way and it's not going to go well," and like she's going to, and
Yep.
then eventually you have the conversations and you're like, "Oh, that was a lot better than I thought it would have been." Or like, there's the initial. What's been interesting to me is you don't have to solve every conversation you have. Like you don't have to, I feel this way. Well, I feel this way. Well, you don't have to like come to terms to agreement. You just get it out and then you move on. And it's just like this thing that, it doesn't have to have a conclusion. It's just like, okay, well, we both put that out there and we'll probably put it out there again in a month from now, but it's just
Yeah.
there and we'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing too, man. It's like you can always argue the events or the things, but you can't argue the way someone feels. It's just like, hey, these are my
hmm
feelings. I'm entitled to them. You're entitled to yours. And if you're feeling bad, like I'm sorry, I obviously didn't want to make you feel bad. So I will say maybe something that I do differently from a lot of folks. It seems like probably from all the self help stuff over the years is it's like when those moments come up, a lot of times I think couples will start building their onions, right? It's like the layers just get stacked because they don't address those things. For me,
hmm
I'm like, all right, if Marissa's feeling negative or bad about something I'm doing, I always try to, and I'm not perfect with it, obviously, but I try to pause and just be like, all right, like, am I being a little too sensitive here? Is usually, the issue, or is there something I'm doing? And then I'll think about it and be like, hey, like I'm gonna try to like be a lot less sensitive about that or like not do that thing if I
hmm
think if it's a fair criticism. But then you
hmm
also have to know when things aren't a fair criticism, and that's like a whole we could probably spend hours just talking about navigating relationships.
Not an expert in this situation. Yeah,
I'm far
I
from
don't
it.
know. Um, all right. What's the most stressful part of your day to day life?
Most stressful today is probably just trying to manage so many different things. Like right now, I've got a water business. I've got a new tech
hmm
startup. We're about to do a like a pretty sizable addition on our house. We have Ryan. Like all these things are kind of all happening at the same time, and you can make an
hmm
argument that like any one of them is a full time job. So I think just managing all of that with my wife's work schedule. It's like time management. Short answer to your question, just getting it all in prioritized and making sure everything gets the right attention.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing men and their well being right now?
What we talked about before, not getting together and playing, whether it's
Mm,
sports or whatever. Guys just need to play with each other.
yeah. Yeah. I feel that. That was one of the reasons I started this podcast was just so I could hang out with guys more like you.
Yeah,
I mean, we're not in person, but like, hey, this is closer to than what I was doing before.
Same.
So yeah, we can. There's got to be like some sort of plug-in for this video conference that allows us to play like tic-tac-toe or something. You know?
Well, I'll tell you one of the startups that I was considering doing before I started doing what I'm doing now. So I was like, why do sports just like kind of stop? You know, like I
Mm-hmm.
had an awesome high school sports experience. Like it was just like lived in a small town, and it was just a really cool thing. And I always enjoyed the
Mm-hmm.
rivalries with the competing towns. And I was like, why aren't there still sports like high school versus high school based on where you live? Like, why isn't there, Westlake versus Lake Travis, the adult years of all these different sports? Like, how cool
Yeah.
would that be if that still existed? Kids can come watch their parents compete, for the town sports. Like, I don't know. I
My
didn't get,
dad's gonna beat up your dad.
yeah, exactly.
That'd be awesome. I'm down for that. It's a good reason to stay in shape,
Yeah.
to be sport ready. All right, man. We covered a ton of stuff in this conversation. So thanks for being being honest and going through all of that stuff with me. First off, thank you.
Oh yeah. Thank you, man. It was my pleasure. It's fun to chat through all this with you.
Yeah. So how can people keep up with what you're doing and learn more about you? What's the best place to do that?
Uh, Really, it's through like direct conversation with me at this point. Like I mentioned, I'm like off social for
Send
the
him a
most
carrier
part.
pigeon.
Yeah, it's like my email is pretty easy. I'm at it at handraise.com right now is my
Mm-hmm.
new tech startup. I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't really post much updates
Mm-hmm.
on LinkedIn. I've kind of found the more successful I get, the less I want a lot of people to know, quite frankly, about like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, because you just get
Yeah.
kind of like hunted down by all the financial planners and accountants of the world all day, every day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no knock on
That's
those
fun.
folks, by the way, but that's one of my reasons for kind of ducking low. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to hang out and chat with anyone. So just hit me up direct email, and I'm happy to chat.
Sweet. All right. Well, thanks again, Matt. Thanks for joining me on the Manful Yoga podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you on the next video, or we'll talk on the next podcast.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
If you like that episode, check out this other one right here. I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed, click this subscribe button over here, and you can listen to the full episodes on any major podcasting platform. Full details below in the description.